Could you please share more with us? What is your vision for Africa, and how does that inform the strategic priorities on which you work at the UNDP?
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Babakar. Good. Is it afternoon now or evening already? I've just got off the plane, so forgive me. It's really great to be here. Thank you, Fadila, for inviting me. It's the first time I'm among angels, so I'm assuming it's going to rub off on me. But Babakar, you know, it takes seeing and living this continent to fall in love with it. And I think, you know, growing up here in Nigeria and going to school here, and we all had to draw the African map, you know, at some point and fill in those spots. And I've always wondered why the Africa map is shaped like a question mark. Did you ever notice it? I think there's this concept that is very foreign for those who carved out this continent and put it there as a question mark on some spot on the global map. And I've always felt that though Africa is shaped like a question mark, Africa actually has the answer that the world is looking for. Because after all, life started on this continent. Without Africa, there will be no world. And I feel in terms of vision, what we see is a prosperous, peaceful, but more importantly, integrated Africa. The question mark has to do with the sort of decapitation of the continent, the fragmentation of the continent, and a unified Africa brings an answer to a world that desperately needs it. So my vision is really of an Africa that is peaceful, prosperous, integrated, and becomes a united force on the global stage.
That is a very interesting way to look at it. I had never thought about the question, but what you say about Africa being the answer, I want to dig a little more into that, because it is true that there's a number of things that we have in Africa that have inspired the world. In which ways do you think that today and going forward, Africa can inspire different areas of the global development?
I think just in terms of Africa's rich heritage, which I hope that we don't depart from. I mean, just walking into this building, and thank you for choosing this space, I didn't know it existed, and seeing the depth of culture, of authenticity, of dignity, the footprint that Africa's ancestors have left, but also the experience. And as you walk through the corridors, what you see is life that existed, that was sophisticated, and really layered with knowledge that's probably been, you know, the designs to sort of wipe all of this away and assume that this continent is just created out of nothing. So I really think that this concept of Africa being so rich in experience, in its humanity, you know, because that's the other thing that is really walking away from the world today. Now, I live in New York, and I'm there at the global center at the United Nations, and of course, we receive nations day in, day out, and when you listen to what's happening in our world today, where the concept of solidarity, which actually is an African concept, when you think about that notion of Ubuntu, I am because you are, is constantly being pushed. You know, there's a pushback on that concept of our common humanity and global solidarity. And you feel that this continent, if you look at what happened during COVID, when you had all the lockdown, and it was, every man for himself. This was the one place in the world that decided to embrace solidarity. Ethiopia gave its airline to the rest of the continent to continue flying in supplies in what it called solidarity flights. You saw our African financial institutions like Afreximbank really stand up and work with governments to make sure that Africa had the vaccines that it needed to survive at a time when no one else cared. But it didn't just stop there with Africa. It extended that to the Caribbean, that was also a region suffering from the exclusion, if you like. So, and if you look at, I work in the development space and I've worked in the humanitarian space as well. When you look at the number of refugees that are hosted on this continent, if you take a country like Chad, for instance, that is actually in a very dire situation in terms of its own development conditions, hosting, millions of refugees from next door and beyond, and giving them hospitality in their own situation of lack. I worked in Uganda. Uganda was hosting over 1 million refugees from neighboring countries, and over the years, not just in one moment, and actually saying, we don't even want to put these refugees in camps. We recognize their dignity, we recognize the fact that they need to feel safe and they need to have a sense of belonging even if they're in another country. And so we don't want camps here. We want to give them land so that they can cultivate the land and feel, human, not just people who live on handouts. And country after country, you see this openness to humanity, to solidarity. It is missing in our world today. I mean, just look how many refugees have been kicked out of so many countries, in countries that can actually afford to have those refugees. So I think today, when you think about this continent and what it has to offer to the world, it's massive. And it's also timely because, as I said, there is a kind of a drought out there when it comes to humanity coming together, to work together, and to move forward together.
I want to pause just 2 seconds to reflect on what you have just said. With this being said, how do we balance this solidarity, community, humanity that we have in Africa and our culture, the changing global order, which is not going in that direction, like you underlined, and the imperative for development and to create wealth, where the model for wealth creation that has been developed tends to go to the opposite of specifically this value in which we want to be rooted, especially as we're in this community of entrepreneurs and investors. What message do you want to share?
Yeah, our world has we've watched it become increasingly unequal. And, the world has never been as wealthy as it is today, but at the same time, we've never experienced the depth of inequality that we see today. That wealth is going to very few people when, the vast majority of people live with nothing. And in fact, the systems, the structures, the institutions seem to also have been structured and created in a way that they support this inequality. And they do so with impunity. One area that this, for me, is extremely disturbing because we no longer have a rules-based world, that is fair in any way, in any sense of the word. So you take the area of illicit financial flows. And I was really shocked to find out how this has been legitimized by legal systems that are designed to support these kind of illicit and legalize them in a way. So you can't really find fault with it. You know, you have lawyers who have specialized in helping the rich get away with murder. So it's possible for you to basically rip a country off by, you know, not paying your taxes. You know, you're a big corporate. You find lawyers and accountants that can justify your ability to steal from people. You find it in many of the industries today. This is, of course, unacceptable. We have systems that are just not designed to favor poor people. You look at even in terms of innovation. The classic innovations are not necessarily designed. They're not solving for the poor. And that's why this room here is important, where we have people who have committed their lives to investing in those that are actually solving for the poor, those who are solving for the ordinary person. You have a young woman in Kenya who says, I need to find a solution to those smallholder farmers who are losing their products, their crops to climate change on a daily basis, some of them committing suicide because they're just watching their life's work erased in front of them, and there is no climate insurance that supports them because the banking systems are not affordable for people like that. And she says, this is what I want to make my mission. I want to be able to design a financial mechanism that makes that climate insurance accessible, affordable for the smallholder farmers that she has in her country. And she's innovating around this. So who is investing in her? You know, if we have investors like some of you in the room saying, we want to trust this young woman because if she succeeds, you will have people who would never have had a chance to access those kinds of support systems, suddenly able to access them en masse. So that's, I mean, for what we're talking about in this room today is going to shift the landscape quite significantly from what it is. And that's why UNDP cares about this innovation space that focuses on young people, because we think that young people today represent the cabinet of conscience. Many of them have lived through trauma. You know, they've seen their mothers die while giving birth. They've seen their aunts working the ground. They're young, but their hands are, completely dried up because there's no machinery, there's no relief. They have experienced the pain of parents working so many hours for very limited returns. And they are waking up every day to these realities and saying, we want to change this situation. So it's organic, it's personal. And what I'm finding in a lot of our young people today is they're not innovating and building businesses so they can go buy private jets and fly to the moon. They really want to change the situations where they are coming from, their communities, and all the innovations, most of them, you see them, are really talking to this issue of how you solve for communities. So I think we're in for a treat, and it's all coming out of Africa.
I'm very excited by what you just said because, as you've all noticed, we have just moved from the vision to actually the solution. And you've highlighted very clearly an issue that we see in most African economies, is that when you look at African economies, whether it is the banking sector or any other kind of services that generally are expected to be available for the general population and businesses, it will be absent. You look at the banking sector, for the longest time, before and after independence, most businesses and people cannot access the financial sector.
Yeah.
they cannot access the means to be developed until M-Pesa, mobile money, fintech, now is making this available to most people. So effectively, the vision that you're highlighting, which I believe we all believe in today here, is that through innovation we can build solutions and therefore an economy that is inclusive and addresses the challenges of even the poorest people in our societies. And in that way, we can build inclusive communities. There's a number of projects, because this is not just talk, there are a number of projects that you have built that are actually catering to this. Could you tell us a bit more about those initiatives? I'm sure the public is keen to know.
Yeah, you know, Babaka, I'm really excited about a future in Africa where women take their seat at the table. Because this, I know I'm in Nigeria, you know, because this has been missing, and I don't just mean that women haven't been working. In fact, women work harder than men anywhere in the world. I can say that for sure. I don't know any woman in Africa who takes a vacation. When I say women taking their seat at the table, if you look at governance on this continent, who is governing Africa? It's mostly men. In fact, who is governing the world? When you look at a sort of a picture, you know, imagine the picture of our world leaders today, global leaders. You can count maybe one or two women. And I'm sorry, they haven't done well in governing our world or countries in Africa. I think women need to be given a chance. And you can say, oh, but you know, do you mean that women are better leaders than men? Let's find out. Because we would never know unless we actually tried. But it's not so much about saying women replace men. It's saying that we are a 50-50 world. And so when it comes to governing, you should imagine a 50-50 opportunity for the best to come out of each of those sexes. And so one initiative that I took on when I started this job at the UNDP was to provide an opportunity for young African women, because people like me in the UN system for over 25 years, I'm on my way out of the system, but I ask myself every day, who is replacing me? And who have I brought along in the next generation to be part of the global leaders of this organization? And unless you're intentional about it, it's not just going to happen, because let's face it, there aren't a lot of opportunities that are made available for girls, even though they are qualified. So intentionally, we created a program called the Africa Young Women Leaders Fellowship Program. It's in its 4th year now, where every year we create job opportunities, fellowship opportunities for young, deserving African graduates, females, to come serve for 1 year in the organization, posted in different parts of the world, so that they can get the exposure and get equipped for global leadership, not just leadership in their own countries, because we're a global organization. And I'm so proud to say that as of today, we have graduated nearly 100 of these young women.
Wow.
and more coming. And increasingly, I see them on the world stage, leading, growing their confidence. And it's not so much about money and position. It's about opportunity. It's about giving that space for young African women to gain the confidence that they need to occupy the space of leadership. Because we don't take that for granted. Culturally, young girls are made to feel that they are not up to it, or that they belong only in certain places. So I think that's been very important. The second initiative you already mentioned, which is, I'm obsessed with the youth of Africa and the possibility. And I actually am not a believer in saying we have to manage the youth, we have to control them, because otherwise they will be out in the streets. Please, let them be out in the streets protesting. But let them use their energy constructively, not in a destructive way. And our youth have proved that they have talent, but the opportunity is not there. They have proved that they are allies in building sustainable futures, but the opportunity is not always there. And so Timbuktu comes on stream as the largest initiative in the world to create a big tent where different players come together who are of a common mind to power this revolution, really to spark the startup revolution that we've already seen really multiplying on the continent. It's not just going to happen without some support. And so our mission is to crowd in not only catalytic, but also commercial capital. As you say, capital seems to be going away from where it should really end up. And we want to force capital in the direction of these young minds that are creating their idea banks. Whether you find them in the universities, with very little, they are creating so much. Or you look at the creative industry, what has happened in this industry. There are creatives in the room today. This is the industry that is so unique in terms of putting Africa on an economic frontier that is cutting edge. Because this is the industry where Africa's authenticity is, established. You cannot steal someone's cultural heritage, someone's talent and creativity from them. The extractive industry is very difficult to replicate in the creative industry. You can't just extract that value. So bringing support to an industry like the creatives that help to establish how Africans see themselves and how they are positioning for the world to see them, that help to grow the confidence of the continent and change the narrative, as they say, that this isn't the dumping ground of foreign ideas that have no anchor, but this is a place that generates ideas and solutions that can also be received by the rest of the world. If you just think what Nollywood has done in Netflix, or what other industries, film, music, if you don't support sectors like that, we are going to continue to be seen as just a place that is a recipient of aid rather than a creator of solutions. The other aspect is technology, that we know that if we don't leverage the savviness of our young people on digitalization to help them become creators of technology, not just consumers of it, we would have another situation where Africa is just a mere consumer of what's being produced elsewhere, and therefore paying a lot more for those services. So our Timbuktu initiative is also creating spaces for African youth to innovate around creating technology and digital solutions that can also be exported to other parts of the world, but more importantly, that solve Africa's challenges.
Yes. No, thank you very much for sharing all this detail. I want to highlight something that, while it may be obvious that this is actually an investment program that you have presented, this is UNDP leading an investment program, showing a quite transformational change in approach that prioritize liberating the enterprise, the entrepreneurial spirit, and technological edge that is in Africa. And I think that at the time at which we are today, what you have said is very important and should resonate with us. When we look at the technology sector, this is one of the sectors with the highest margins. the margins in the software sector are upwards of 80%. That means that what you pay for is 5 times the price of the costs. So when you're not making it, you're exporting all that value and all those jobs and all those tax revenues abroad. And this is the opportunity for the continent.
You're absolutely right. It's a huge opportunity. I always say to people, don't see Africa from this lens of problems. And I think as development practitioners over the years, Africa was a marketplace for development actors. You know, this is the place where you find a plethora. I mean, you're never short of problems. And it's somehow stuck. And this continent became sort of a poster child for humanitarian development aid, so to speak. And it masked the capacity, the vast talent and capacity of this continent. And I think that's what UNDP has tried to represent. It's not to condemn any region, not less Africa, to this notion of being a problem to be solved, but to start to see it as a place that is generating solutions, not only for its own challenges, but also for the world's challenges. And when you shift that lens, the energy shifts, and you start to invest in opportunity rather than, you know, we used to say, in UNDP, we used to have what, pillars of our work, and one of them was a poverty pillar, you know. This year in our strategic plan, for the first time, we changed poverty to prosperity. It's a very important shift, because the opposite is that you are managing poverty. And for the last 60 years, we can be managing poverty. In other words, it becomes our work, and the focus is on poverty. But the moment you shift to looking at prosperity, which is opportunities, investing in opportunities and investing in hope, then you are powering the creation of the kind of wealth, and I'm not talking here about wealth that grows inequality, but wealth that really is shared, prosperity that is shared. Then poverty becomes nothing, you know? It just dissolves, because your focus is on empowering communities to own their own destiny, you know, to cultivate their own, not on telling them that somebody else has to come and help them do this and that. So that really nurturing the capacity and changing the narrative around managing poverty to really promoting prosperity has been an important learning for us after 60 years in the business. And I have to say it is so empowering, so inspiring, because it's bringing us into these spaces of partnerships that are actually very healthy. So where you are seeing the people themselves, the young people, the women, demonstrating every day that they're capable. And all they need is for us to remove the obstacles from their way. You know, sometimes they're not even asking for much. You know, basically take the obstacles out of our way. And that's why our Timbuktu initiative talks about policy. I heard you had a policy session here earlier. Regulations are really an important part of that, because sometimes we regulate innovation to death rather than, we strangle innovation with regulations rather than stimulus, kind of regulations that stimulate innovation and creativity. So UNDP works closely with governments, as you know, and we use this proximity and presence to really change minds on that side, on the public sector side as well. We work also with regional institutions. Very important that institutions like the African Union, with a very big vision, 2063, understand that what might be seen as small granular things around the policy harmonization and environment are actually fundamental to achieving that vision, 2063. So we're working at different levels here to say it takes all of us. It takes every person in this room. It takes investors. And we want to have Africa's money work for Africa's development, you know? This is a country where we're losing a lot of resources on a daily basis. Africa mobilizes or generates a lot of money, but does not mobilize it for its own development. And we need to question that. And part of it also is in the governance realm, how institutions are being designed to either support, nurture, or to kill potential. So that's, for us really, really important as UNDP to see how we work with everyone, public sector, private sector, academia, the policymakers, the think tanks in the room, but more importantly, those in the industry, to understand that we need to bring conscience into business. And it's not just about CSR. It really is how you put your business model at the disposal of creating transformation that changes lives and creates consumers for your business. It's totally a win-win.
Exactly. And I'm being told that we have 2 minutes. I had so many more questions, but I wanted to follow up on this point that you said that's very important, is the change of the narrative. You're sitting in the middle, talking to governments, all the regional organizations, private sector. What we see, which you mentioned earlier, is capital flows coming out of Africa. Mm-hmm. So essentially investors voting with their feet. We see also our young people going out of Africa because in so many different places they lost hope.
Yeah.
How are you, what outcome do you expect? And how do we shift this narrative? Not just for international investors, but even for ourselves, so that effectively this African capital can go back these African opportunities and shape this narrative.
Trust. Trust is really important. I think one of the things that's happened to us as Africans, we stopped believing in ourselves because of the historical fissures and all the things that this continent has been through in history really did a number on the mindset. And you have a situation where people would trust more what comes from outside than what comes from within. I had an experience this afternoon when I checked into my hotel and a fruit basket was brought in. I'm very observant about these things. I'm in Nigeria, tropical country, with the best tropical fruits that you can imagine. And I get a fruit basket of grapes and, fading apples, everything imported. And I had to send it back. And I said to the young lady, can you please bring me a basket with Nigerian fruits? And she looked at me. She looked at me like, are you for real? I said, yes, whatever is grown in this country is what I want to see in that basket. Now, I was in Japan a couple of months ago, and I was fascinated by the fact that everywhere I went, including my hotel room, everything was Japanese. The sweets, the cakes, there was nothing foreign on the table. The pride that they had in displaying what was their own. And it goes deep because what it also means is today, when we look at the investments into our startups, I think you may have the numbers better than me, but I was reading somewhere that 83% of the investment that will come into our startups are foreign, come from outside. Only 20-something% from within the continent. And then I'm asking myself, and Fadila, as I walked in, I saw that sign that says, Africa invest in Africa. I think that's no mean statement. Unless we can have Africans who have the confidence, the trust in their own products, in their own people, and who have their skin in the game, we should not expect foreigners to bet on what we have to offer. And it's really, I feel so challenged by that. And this is what we're driving. We've created through our Timbuktu initiative what we call a Gazelle Fund. And the idea is to challenge Africa's billionaires to invest in creating companies that scale fast. Not livelihood entrepreneurs. That we have to continue to do en masse. But unless we can have companies whether it's 1,000, and here I'm not even talking about unicorns, gazelle companies that are able to influence the capital market of the continent, we are not going anywhere. We will not be able to transform economies. And it's not going to come from outside. We really need to challenge not just the billionaires, the millionaires, and those who have just thousands. We need the patient investors in early stage risk capital. Because if Africans don't do it, we shouldn't expect others to do it.
I think everything is said. Let's applaud, please. And on this note, I want to also personally congratulate Eban for this amazing first day. I've met so many people I didn't know when I thought I knew already so many people. Thank you so much.
Well done to you, Babacar. Thank you so much for navigating that conversation so expertly, bringing us towards the end of the first ever ABAN Congress 2025, but not without these two very important elements. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor Her Excellency Ahunna Eziakonwa for her visionary leadership, transformative service, and unwavering dedication to Africa's sustainable future. Tonight we honor this woman who is a UNDP's Regional Director for Africa because she has championed inclusive growth across 46 nations and counting, redefining development through innovation, African solutions, and people-centered leadership. Tonight, we honor this extraordinary daughter of the continent for being a true builder of institutions and advocate for youth and women, for embodying the spirit of purpose-driven transformation, for leading with courage, compassion, and conviction. Tonight, Your Excellency, ABAN proudly celebrates you. You are a trailblazer, a reformer, and an architect of impact. And you are the reason Africa is becoming more self-reliant and Africa is thriving. We honor you, we celebrate you, and we say, keep on keeping on. Your Excellency, Ms. Ahunna Eziakonwa, congratulations.